So we're ready to begin the Q&A portion of the program. Mr. McCarthy, I'd like you to engage on a point, maybe with Bob Barr. You said that in an era of terror, that surveillance is the best defense that the country has. If, in fact, the war on terror is a war that is not finite, but a war that may last for decades, if not centuries, should the government's power in such surveillance be open-ended? And I'd like a quick response, and then if, Bob, you want to pick up on that very point.
Of course it should, because the purpose of the power is to prevent attacks, and as long as the threat of attack exists, it would make no sense to get rid of the power.
So this is not a wartime power. You're talking about permanent.
It's a threat time power. It's an asymmetric war fought by a terrorist threat. And these measures are designed as much to thwart the threat as they are to prevail in the ultimate war.
Bob?
The current administration defines this war as unending, that is perpetual. It defines it as entirely global. That is, the streets of Baghdad are as much a field for the commander-in-chief to operate in as the streets of Atlanta, Georgia, or New York City. And this administration believes that a president can don that mythical commander-in-chief hat whenever he or she feels like it, and therefore trumps any other power in the Constitution or law. That is the great danger here. The greatest tool with which the government ought to be equipped to avoid another 9/11 is not domestic surveillance, which is the topic at hand this evening, but better, more consistent gathering of foreign intelligence and tearing down the walls between one agency and another that have prevented and continue to stand in the way of effective use of that intelligence, that foreign intelligence. John?
I just want to take issue with the underlying premise of your question and Bob's response, which is there's no reason to think the war on terrorism is going to be endless. There have been many wars between nation states and terrorists before, and they have ended. There have been wars in the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany with terrorists, and they have all come to an end. I think the problem is that we call it the war on terrorism, so we think we're at war with everyone who uses terrorism as a tactic, which is not the case. We're at war with the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization and organizations that help it. And when we defeat that organization, the war will come to an end.
Yeah, one sentence. I mean, because I think what Bob Barr said is very important. Notice that he's for enhanced foreign surveillance. But the moment that terrorist actually enters the United States, that's when the surveillance must stop. Because I guess then he stopped being dangerous.
Nobody's saying that.
You want more surveillance that. Up to the point of
I didn't say foreign surveillance.
No
foreign intelligence. That's the key.
We're just saying subject to what kinds of oversight and what kinds of protections to make sure that not only is it consistent with individual liberty, but also that it's promoting of national security.
The opposite of more is less.
No, that's not true. It's more targeted, which means it will be more effective.
The balance that we're arguing for is precisely the one that prevailed before the Patriot Act. And we're not taking issue with all of the Patriot Act, but with those provisions, mostly those dealing with national security letters and warrantless searches, that allow surveillance in secret merely by asserting that it's relevant to terrorism. The small reform that we're arguing for is to restore the pre-Patriot Act requirement that the suspect has to be a suspected spy or terrorist or his associates. And the administration, in rejecting that simple reform, has opposed sunset provisions and made clear that it wishes these changes to be perpetual. So John's notion that these will evaporate is inconsistent with the administration's determination to change domestic surveillance.
My ears are ringing at this phrase targeted, because I will agree with you that many of the things the U.S. government does, including those bag searches, are stupid and pointless. But precisely the reason that everybody's toiletries and magazine reading is on display when you enter an airplane is in order to avoid targeting. That what the federal government has done since 9/11 is have a very conscious decision. They're going to play, to use a sports analogy, they're going to play the players. They're not going to play the ball. And so we have this vast, untargeted, project, precisely because organizations like the ACLU have opposed things
I'm
like
sorry,
trusted
you
traveler
completely
programs.
misunderstand our position. It depends what the basis is for targeting. Individualized suspicion based on what you do, not racial profiling based on who you are.
But the
And I
ACLU
have
is
to
opposed to
say,
the trusted
law
traveler program, right?
enforcement officials have agreed that demographic profiling is as ineffective as it is violative of individual rights,
There's
because
many
the
law
terrorists can
enforcement-
get around the profile very
There's-
easily.
There's as many law enforcement officers who disagree with that as agree with it.
Well,
And your flat statement that the Fourth Amendment requires individualized suspicion is just wrong.
Okay, before we get too deep into the woods of the Constitution, I know we have some folks who have some questions, so if you're ready, there's somebody with a microphone standing by.
How do we have proof that someone's a terrorist until they commit a terrorist act?
Would you like to direct that to one side or one of the panelists?
Foreign intelligence law, since the law was passed in the 1970s, presumes that there's a level of suspicion that stops short of probable cause that someone's committed a crime, but makes pretty clear that we think that this is a really bad person. And this was a balance that no one suggested caused 9/11. And what's so interesting about the other side is their failure to say that that standard is too high. There's no evidence that anyone wasn't the object of a FISA warrant because there wasn't a high enough degree of suspicion. They want to completely throw out individualized suspicion and have hundreds and thousands of warrants for people who just happen to show up at the airport. So this is not a subtle distinction, and we're convinced that by resurrecting that simple requirement, you could even broaden it a little bit. If you want to talk about the technical details, there have been thoughtful civil libertarians who've said you could have probable cause that someone's a suspected spy or terrorist or his or her associates. At least some connection to an identifiable, dangerous bad guy.
And
it's the dragnet searches that are threatening, and the other side has provided no justification.
Let's let the other side respond. John had a point here.
First of all, I think it's a great question because under the current law within the United States, as Jeff said, you need to have probable cause that someone's a terrorist before you can slap the wiretap on them. And it shows this fundamental confusion between how we think of terrorism. I think the other side thinks of it as a crime and is best handled through the standard criminal justice system, which is this probable cause approach. It makes a lot of sense when, as a society, we are willing to accept the harms of terrorism and retrospectively, after it occurs, then try to use the law enforcement system. What 9/11 showed us is that our government is trying to act prospectively to stop terrorist attacks before they occur. And in order to do that, we cannot rely on a system which says, prove to me that this person is already a terrorist because of criminal actions they have already engaged in. Because at that point, usually, as we saw in 9/11, they are already dead, and there's no one to hold responsible in the criminal justice system.
As John himself knows, that is absolutely not the standard. It is much watered down. As Andy said, the court has not applied the strict Fourth Amendment probable cause requirement in this context, but required just some basis for suspicion. And let me tell you, the opposite danger, not only to individual rights, but to national security. The FBI has been complaining bitterly about this sweeping national security agency intercepts because it has led to countless hours of wasted time tracking down, quote, leads that lead nowhere, to dead ends. So again, the notion of honing in on somebody as to whom we have some basis for having suspicion is more effective from a security point of view as well as from an individual rights point of view.
Nadine is again demonstrating the difference between a law enforcement mindset and a criminal justice mindset. If you wait until you have probable cause that someone is an agent of a foreign power, you have waited too long. And that may be what the standard is in the criminal justice system, that may be what's appropriate in the criminal justice system, but the Fourth Amendment has never required that. What the Fourth Amendment requires is that searches be reasonable. And if our goal is going to be to stop terrorist acts rather than to bring people to justice, that has to be the standard that we deal with. And we have to do it with an intelligence mindset, which is far different from the criminal mindset. When the FBI investigates a crime, they expect to bet about 900. They expect that most of the time when they conduct an investigation, they're going to get their man, and they're going to successfully prosecute him. Intelligence doesn't work that way. If you hit 1 for 15, you're probably doing well. But it's chasing the needle in the haystack that intelligence is about. And if you're going to apply criminal justice standards to that task, you're finished.
How about 3 out of 153,000?
Let's move off this point just for a few seconds.